So what are duality games? Well, they're a type of game that has two individual connected halves. If Moonlighter, Cult of the Lamb, Dave the Diver, Potioncraft, or Dome Keeper sound familiar, you might already know what makes a duality game. Each of these games have two sides to them, two sides that are reliant on each other to exist. In Moonlighter, Dave the Diver, and Potioncraft, one side of the game relies on selling items obtained through playing a different side of the game. Cult of the Lamb relies on managing a cult on one side of the game, while the other side relies on you collecting resources in the dark woods where things are trying to kill you. Dome Keeper, which I questioned putting in this video, relies on you mining resources to strengthen your base's defenses from an alien invasion's attacks. I call these duality games. Duality games are weird in the fact that they're more experimental games where you have a clear objective but different forms of gameplay reaching across genre norms. These games rely on you doing good in one half so you can do better in another, and so on and so forth. There are some pain points I have experienced with the new genre, however, the balance between halves is usually engaging and, at very least, interesting. Since duality game is a term I haven't heard referred to before, I think it's new, and I want to lay out what I think determines if a game is a duality game. Originally, when coming up with a list of games I could deem to be duality games, I thought of Moonlighter, Cult of the Lamb, and Dave the Diver immediately. Initially, I didn't know what to call this genre, and day and night games almost stuck. Each of these three games have a day and a night phase. The day phase in these games is the section where you are managing something in a way, and the night phase is the one more reliant on exploration, item collection, progression, and maybe even combat. I noticed another common theme with these games being that they each rely on management in some way for the day phase. I questioned this whole genre idea. Is it worth anyone's time to make a genre name for management games with extra steps? And I thought some more. That's when I came up with the term duality game. Essentially a game with two modes that are both tied together and required to progress. Which seems vague at first, but, well, never mind, it's just vague. To what extent does a game need to have halves to be a duality game? Can these halves touch? And what makes a game a duality game? I genuinely don't know how lenient the genre should be. Maybe duality games need to have explicit halves, like a day and night phase, but then again, as you'll see later, Potioncraft and Dome Keeper don't have this division. It's a weird dilemma where I don't want to make the genre too restrictive or too open. That being said, here's some ground rules that I came up with to help me categorize duality games before I continue forward. A duality game needs halves, so two separate genres or approaches to play. There can be more, but currently two seems like the most feasible. These halves need to be reliant on each other, where progressing one half progresses the other. These halves are connected, so no side game modes do not count. The duality mode needs to be a main mode, otherwise what's the point? Both halves are consistent games, so assorted mini or micro games don't count. Both halves must be interacted with. They can, however, be skipped later after progressing enough. You can only play one half at a time, otherwise that's just a synergy genre. For example, first-person shooter tower defense games are not duality games unless if the first-person shooter half is not overlapping. So for example, a tower defense game that splits into different rounds afterwards, where you play a round of a shooter game to get resources for your towers or something like that. And lastly, both halves need to be gameplay oriented. Skill trees aren't games, so if there's a separate area where you need to go to mess with the skill tree, that doesn't count as a duality game. My first exposure to duality games was Moonlighter, which is non-coincidentally the oldest game on the list. Moonlighter released in 2018, and I played it at the beginning of 2020. Moonlighter, as one would guess, is one of the best examples of a duality game. A moonlighter is someone who works an extra job, mostly at night, which, in a way, is just the best way to describe most duality games. Again, my working genre title was once day and night games. Anyway, in Moonlighter, you run a shop in the small town of Moonlighter, and the shop profits off of items obtained in the dungeon. When on dungeon runs, you'll acquire different loot, which you can spitball the right prices to sell when you get back home. The gameplay loop is decently basic for both sides, which upsettingly affected my preference towards the game. The night phase of the game, in which you dungeon crawl, did not compare to other isometric roguelikes I've played. The dungeon crawling portion of the game was very lackluster with little enemy and weapon variety. The difficulty was not engaging, for me at least, and I didn't feel like the section offered enough to justify itself. The day phase, or management and shop running side of the game, was very basic, and it felt like a slog to get through, just so I could make profits and hop into another half-fun dungeon run. Moonlighter was not a game for me. However, I respect the ideas and how it would play a role in the future of new experimental games. Moonlighter is an okay experience, but playing it for as long as I did, which was just until the end of the story, was more than enough for me. Moonlighter 2 is coming out later this year, and honestly I feel like it will be far better than the original. The combat looks more fluid, and I feel like the developers learned a lot from the first game, and will be able to effectively balance both sides to be fun. Cult of the Lamb was the second Duality game I was exposed to. It released in late 2022, and I played it shortly after. Cult of the Lamb, as I mentioned before, is a game where you manage a cult on one half and dungeon crawl on the other half. Unlike Moonlighter, both halves of Cult of the Lamb feel like a complete experience. The management section of the game is fun in its own right. Even if I have some complaints with all the busy work in the management half, I can admit that it's well done and a decently executed portion of the game. There's a lot to do in terms of management. Daily rituals, interaction with cult members, and resource gathering are just some things. The roguelike portion of the game isn't amazing by any means. There aren't any large dungeon crawls like Isaac or Gungeon offers, but the game isn't trying to be that. Cult of the Lamb offers more bite-sized dungeon crawling bits. You see, time progresses at a normal rate when in either half of the game, so the shorter dungeon crawls make sense. You don't want everything going to hell when you're gone for too long. The gameplay itself in the runs is alright. There's a small variety of weapons and modifiers you'll unlock as the game progresses, and the combat is fluid and rewarding. The combat is a little easy for my taste, but that's fine considering that Cult of the Lamb is still 50% a management game, and I don't expect much of an overlap from players in the two genres represented. I think my biggest critique and pain point of Cult of the Lamb is the necessity to play both halves and engage with them nearly equally. I enjoyed both halves, but some days I'd rather just play one instead of having to juggle game genres and feel like a helicopter parent for my cult members while I yearn for the forests. Dave the Diver is the next Duality game I played. At least I'm saying it is just to keep things in order. It was released in the middle of 2023, and I played it in late 2024. The game's two halves are split between both managing and running a restaurant, and exploring an underwater ecosystem, collecting fish and other resources to use in said restaurant. The moment-to-moment gameplay of both halves is engaging and fun, and there's a lot of variety in play in the forms of minigames, extra things to manage, and quests to progress through. Dave the Diver is a well-made game in both halves, and both halves from a gameplay standpoint are fairly unique when compared to everything else in this list. Running the restaurant is fun, even if the gameplay's duration is on the shorter side. When I'm done with the restaurant portion of the day, I don't regret hopping back into the exploration part of the game. There's a certain tempo to both modes, and constantly advancing in Dave the Diver is something that I really enjoyed out of my experience with the game. Sometimes, when exploring the ocean, you run into a dungeon segment where you have to solve puzzles. And then the game tells you exactly what to do, invalidating any inclusion of said puzzles in the game. Is that relevant? No, but I felt the need to say one thing I absolutely despised about playing through Dave the Diver. The game's not hard, and it doesn't need to be. It's fun and engaging, except that whole puzzle thing, which, no, I will not stop being mad at. It's just a pet peeve. Let me figure stuff out by myself, come on. Either way, one notable thing that Dave the Diver does in the balancing sense of its halves is enable the player to skip portions of the day. If you're not feeling like cooking that day, you can lose some profits just to fish more. Or if you just want to run the restaurant, you can skip fishing if you have enough stock to supply the restaurant. I never really used this feature, but it was a nice choice considering the reliance on both halves these games can be prone to. Now, I debated for a while putting Potion Craft and Dome Keeper in the video, but here we are. For those of you who don't know, Potion Craft is a game where you mix potions using ingredients and sell said potions to townsfolk, and so on. Potion Craft released in late 2022, I played it for a bit in 2023, and stopped until it got a major update right at the end of 2024. Potion Craft is a shop running game that doesn't really feel like it's one of those. The duality in potioncraft comes from its two halves of the game, which are closely connected, where you A. gather plants from your garden and brew potions, and B. sell potions and buy resources from townsfolk and salespeople respectively. In the sales half, you can barter using a skill check system, which raises profits and lowers losses. The game is very light in gameplay, as it's kind of just a comfy game. The more gameplay intensive half is where the game gets its title from. Potion crafting in potioncraft is a kind of tunnel vision-y fun that I rarely enjoy, and for whatever reason I like it a lot here. Potioncraft is a very easy game to pick up as well as quit. I'd recommend Potioncraft if you want a chill duality game where both sides aren't punishing and where the connection between the two sides aren't structured in a one more turn type way that keeps you hooked hopping from half to half. Now, saying Potioncraft is a duality game somewhat feels wrong. That being said, it matches the criteria I set out earlier. The two halves are required to progress, both halves aren't played in tandem, the main gameplay is consistent between the halves, and even though you can minimize potion crafting itself through making recipes and quick brewing, you never completely remove the potion crafting half. Although potioncraft doesn't really follow a day and night formula, it still checks every box that actually matters, at least to me, for being a duality game. After I played my fair share of potioncraft, Domekeeper became one of my next played duality games. Domekeeper released in 2022, and this time I was late to the party, playing it for the first time this year. Domekeeper's duality genres are tower defense and mining. In order to survive, you need to mine resources to keep your defenses up so you can mine even more, and so on. Like potioncraft, Domekeeper also blurs the lines of separation of its halves, removing the day and night separation. Instead, what happens is that when you start a run, you mine, and after some time passes, enemies mount defenses and fight back. During which I strongly advise going back home and defending your base. Domekeeper, although not a day and night type duality game, uses its halves to its advantage by creating an urgency and balancing act between how you play both sides. You need to balance your mining skills and defensive capabilities so that you can maintain your run and not be swarmed. If you're too bad at mining, you can't upgrade anything, and if you don't upgrade defensive enough because you've invested too much into mining, then you'll lose the run. It's fun, it's engaging, it can be stressful, and the balancing act you play is executed really well. Domekeeper also has modifiers you can toggle before starting your run. There's a lot of potential variety. If you don't want to mine and just dig away without having to actively defend your base, there's a modifier for that. If you want a longer time to mine, you can take that, at the risk of stronger waves that is. Instead of using a shield, you can produce a smoke that delays waves further. The game is replayable, and it also offers a few game lengths as well. Runs can last however long you want, from 20 minutes to over an hour. As someone who enjoyed playing Flash Motherlode as a kid, Domekeeper is a game I can really recommend. It makes me yearn for the mines. So as we've seen by now, a lot of duality games have some potential negatives based around their design philosophy. These negatives are even clearer when you yourself play through any of these games. I think the hardest thing to balance in a duality game is the draw of each game's halves. Making a duality game means that you have to find a balance between the types of playstyles that a duality game forces. If you're hopping into a duality game and you're not fully feeling one half, your experience is likely to be tainted in a small way. If you boot up Dave the Diver while you're not feeling the exploration half, and you just want to run the sushi bar, you might not have the best time. If you want to just dungeon crawl in Cult of the Lamb, your cult might suffer. Duality games are interesting in the fact that they offer multiple experiences, but that can be a negative with how the player may only really want to engage with one experience. Since duality games require multiple game styles, each style needs to be executed well enough to hold interest. Moonlighter is the best example of how a duality game can be executed poorly. Neither half of the game stood out as amazing by any means, and, at least in my opinion, were mediocre experiences. Having a bit too much pressure to manage instead of dungeon crawl in Cult of the Lamb when I was starting to get tired of managing hurt my experience. Both halves of a game need to be consistently enjoyable, which is a hard thing to pull off. Most importantly, what works for some won't work as well for others. To iterate, even if I don't like how some of these games execute their duality, it doesn't mean that they're bad games. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. I think the best way to play duality games is in shorter time frames. This isn't an inherent con, but more of a risk factor. I like to play games in a more brute force approach. For example, if I start a game, I will pretty much only play that game until I've beaten it. I've had too many occasions in the past where I stopped playing a game to never return, and I'd like to avoid that as often as I can. Duality games often seem to punish my approach. Moonlighter, Dave the Diver, and to a smaller extent Cult of the Lamb all wore on me fairly quickly after playing each of them for a while. These day and night type duality games have a gameplay pattern that keeps you playing, just like Civ's infamous one more turn philosophy. There's usually always something to do next with these types of games, and that constant back and forth can be exhausting. I really enjoyed Cult of the Lamb and Dave the Diver, but I didn't enjoy playing the games frequently. If you can pace yourself in your rate of play of duality games, specifically the day and night ones, you'll probably have a better experience. If you want to 100% one of these, please take your time and only play them if you actively want to engage with both halves. Enough of this negativity. I do like duality games. I love the idea and the creative freedoms they provide. Domekeeper and Potioncraft are unique experiences that I genuinely enjoyed playing through. Moonlighter was an interesting idea to see executed, as this was the first duality game I engaged with. Dave the Diver and Cult of the Lamb both opened my eyes to new gaming experiences that I never seriously engaged with before. Duality games can serve as a bridge for gamers to try genres that they would otherwise never touch, and that's really cool. Duality games are unique, and the variety itself that they offer can be fun. I'm a big proponent of variety, and duality games are never boring when you're getting into them. Duality games can be addicting and have a really nice game flow with the whole aforementioned one more turn philosophy. If you're able to quit when you want, and aren't pressuring yourself to get through games like I sometimes do, duality games can be really good passive games to play for an hour when there's nothing else to do. All of these games I listed today apply to this. They are all nice casual games that are fun and accessible to hop into. That's kind of the whole thing with duality games. They're just fun and offer a variety that you don't see all the time in games. They're inherently never too one note, and the experimental gameplay they usually offer can be refreshing. I'm excited to see more duality games be developed and released. Again, I'm gonna shout out Moonlighter 2 releasing later this year. As much crap as I gave the original earlier, I have to respect the developers' ideas and intentions, especially given that they were kind of a pioneer in the genre. I feel like Moonlighter 2 will improve on what I didn't love about the first game, and will be able to stand on its own 2 feet as a solid duality game. The duality game genre has its flaws, but through each iteration of the genre I can feel improvements happening. These games can be developed well, and there's something to enjoy about each of these games. Over time, I feel like the duality genre will only improve. There's a lot that the genre can do with variety and finding different genres that could work in tandem together. There will probably be more synergies in games that don't even have a management half, which does seem to be a common theme so far with duality games. I'm just looking forward to seeing new ideas executed. Duality games are honestly really interesting to me, so I'd love to hear of any that you guys know of that are upcoming or have already released. I'd love to give these a shot. Leave a comment below about what you think of the video or any game recommendations. I'm extremely likely to respond. If you like the video, feel free to share it around, like, and subscribe. Each of these things supports the channel and makes this passion of mine just a little bit more rewarding. I also recently figured out new monetization methods for the channel, and I'm happy to announce that I now have channel memberships. An entirely optional way to support my channel. That being said, I want to shout out my first channel member, Alex Buffmack, who's been on the channel for a while and has been supporting this growing passion of mine. That's all the housekeeping done with. So, as always, thank you for watching, and until next time, later days.